Uh, Hello to all my friends from law school. It's probably the first time I'm talking to all of you in a formal platform. Of course, many of us would have gone drinking together, but that was in a different time and a different space. This webinar was planned essentially because of some odd questions that were floating in our group, where many lawyers kind of expressed their dissatisfaction about the manner in which tax is being imposed, more specifically service tax and GST was imposed on them. And many of them found it hard to kind of comply or to appreciate what law really governs them. And therefore I said, okay, fair enough. I will try and make a session for you all, or do a session for you all where I could explain the nuances. But then the larger objective of this is not only to tell you what the law is. Of course, it's very complicated, and I've tried to kind of simplify it as much as I can. But the larger objective is also to assist the policymakers in steering the very concept of levy of GST on lawyers or law firms in a manner which is better suited for us in keeping with various canons of taxation and which can be taken to our advantage. So I think the presentation therefore is divided into two parts. One is the nuances of what the law is, and second is what we should aim for going forward and what kind of policy advocacy we should be talking to the government about. So therefore there are two aspects to this whole thing. So let me quickly take you to my presentation, and I'll kind of take you through that. Okay. So here is the presentation. Let me just one sec. Give me a minute. Okay. So what we are going to talk, and I think I have about 45 minutes, I'll be very crisp. Some things I will skip. And if you need to have further understanding, you can DM me or reach out to me directly. There's no problem. So there are four things that we have today for you. One is what was the position of service tax under the positive list era, which is essentially up to 2012. The second is what happened thereafter from 2012 until GST came about. What was the law governing us? Then what is the situation under GST? And the fourth is probably the meat which I want to convey to you all in terms of what is the adverse implication of this reverse charge mechanism for us, and what are the way forward that we can actually contemplate and take it to the government. The fifth section is an annexure that is for your ready reference. This presentation will be shared with you all, hard copies of that or soft copies. I'm sure Satya will do whatever needs to be done for that purpose. Now, I must tell you, before I go into the nuances, the levy of service tax on lawyers, law firms, senior advocates have gone through myriad changes. There has been no consistency of approach by the government, and at repeated intervals, the law has been amended, distorted, changed, and various things have happened. So it's a bit convoluted, and therefore what I have done is I've tried to tabulate the position of law at as was applicable at different phases of time. So the first phase is 2009 to 2012, which is the pre-negative list era. Within 2009 to 2012, there is part one, which is 19/2009 to 15/2011. So during this period, what used to typically happen was only when a business entity, now business entity essentially would include a law firm, only when a law only when a law firm provided services to a law firm would it be taxable, and the tax was leviable on a forward charge basis, which means a law firm providing services to a law firm or law firm providing services to a company was liable to service tax, and the tax would have to be discharged by the law firm concerned. Okay, so this was the only category that was liable to tax. Anybody else doing anything which was either in the form of advice, consultancy, or assistance in any branch of law, or even representational services was not included within the ambit of tax, and therefore there was no question of any levy on that round. So the only parties who need to be worried about is business entity to business entity, which was liable to tax. So that's your first period. 2011, May 2011 to 30th June 2012, there was another era that was introduced. There, they said business entity providing services to an individual lawyer or individual, okay, whether it's any individual for that matter, doesn't have to be necessarily a lawyer, any individual client to say, was taxable, and again the law firm concerned was liable to pay tax on a forward charge basis. Now, forward charge basis basically means you, the service provider, needs to add the service tax on your invoice, pay the tax to the government, recover it from your client, which meant all the compliance obligations were there, registration, filing of returns and whatnot. Okay. And then any business entity providing services to any other business entity, which could be in a corporate or any other law firm, was also taxable, that too on a forward charge basis. So during 11-12, what the difference that happened relative to what was happening earlier is that not only business entity to business entity was taxable, but business entity to any individual client or individual lawyer was also taxable. Okay, that too on a forward charge basis. Insofar as representation service is concerned, this took off from May 2011 to 2012, which is when they introduced the taxability of representation services, because earlier on it was only advice that was taxable. So during this period, 2011 to 2012, any individual lawyer, if they were providing to any business entity, any corporation, even to a law firm, they were liable to tax. And that tax liability was to be discharged on a forward charge basis during this period, May 11 to 17/3/2012, and then on a reverse charge basis with effect from March 2012. Essentially, reverse charge and distinction between reverse charge and forward charges. In a reverse charge, the client pays the tax. In a forward charge, the service provider pays the tax. So any individual lawyer in our alumni who may have rendered services to any business entity, corporate, was liable to pay tax, register and pay tax during this period, May 2011 to March 2012. If you have not paid the tax, then you are actually in the wrong side of the law. And thereafter, you don't have any liability because it's the customer or the business entity who needs to pay the tax. And insofar as a business entity providing services to a business entity in the sense that a law firm is representing a client, a corporation, then they were liable to tax under a forward charge basis. Now, what I also want to bring to your notice is that no sooner than this forward charge was brought out, okay, when an individual lawyer was providing service to a corporate, a bunch of writ petitions were filed across the country. Delhi High Court, it was filed, and then Madras High Court, it was filed. The position is, so far as Delhi is concerned, there is an absolute stay from imposition of or recovery and collection of tax on a forward charge basis on individual lawyers. You can take advantage of this judgment. The judgment, the writ petition numbers I've already given, and the citations have also been given to you. But this need not necessarily apply in other states. So whoever is operating or practicing in some other state where the Delhi High Court jurisdiction does not apply, you run the risk of recovery and all that goes along with it. Okay. Then arbitration was also made taxable, and whenever there was an arbitral tribunal providing services to any business entity, they were also liable. The tribunals were also liable to levy to pay tax. Initially, it was on a forward charge basis during this particular period, and thereafter it was exempted. Okay, so the exemption to an arbitral tribunal came about only from September 2011 onwards, not before that. So for that limited duration, even the arbitration tribunal was also liable to tax whenever they were doing an arbitration of corporates. Come 2012, the negative list regime happened. Now, negative list regime essentially meant that earlier, unless you fell under the taxable service definition, you were not taxable. You were not liable to pay tax. And legal services was introduced as a taxable services in 2009. In negative list, everything is taxable unless you are in the negative list, which means whether you provide legal services or consulting services or engineering services, that really doesn't matter. What matters is whether you fall within the negative list or not. If you fell under negative list, there was no charge of tax. And legal services was not in the negative list, which meant the going in position is you're liable to pay tax on legal services unless there are exceptions and exemptions through executive notification that may have been issued. So 2012 onwards, this is what really happened. Individual advocates or firm of lawyers, okay, law firms, they were taxable on a reverse charge basis whenever they provided services to any business entity with a turnover of more than rupees 10 lakhs in the preceding financial year. Now, if you're dealing with any large corporation, okay, obviously this 10 lakh is a pittance, anybody will breach that. In all such cases, the liability existed, but then the liability was not on the individual lawyer or the law firm. Liability was on the client. Any other situation which was not covered by this, what you see in orange, you didn't have to bother at all. Okay, there was no charge of tax, no obligation to register, nothing of that sort. And so this is very, very clear. At the same time, there was a charge of tax that was introduced on senior advocates from 2012 onwards. Now, interestingly, senior advocates were made to pay tax on a forward charge basis, which means they had to charge on their invoice, recovery from their client, deposit to the government, whenever they were rendering services to any business entity having in excess of 10 lakh of turnover. Now, when this RCM was introduced, okay, nobody really bothered because senior advocates could give their assistance in court, and then the client will have to worry about having to pay the tax. But on 1/4/2016, an amendment was made, and instead of reverse charge mechanism, it was made into a forward charge mechanism, okay, which meant that the senior advocate would now have to charge that amount in their invoice and recover it from their client. Whereas earlier on, they wouldn't have to charge, and it was the client who would have to pay. No sooner than this amendment was brought out, which we see in red, series of writ petitions were filed across the country. And I'll tell you the fate of those writ petitions a little while from now. Okay, so they were liable on a for forward charge mechanism for that limited period of 1/4/2016 to 5/6/2016. And because of the uproar that happened in the industry and writ petitions were filed, the government took a back seat and kind of rolled it back. And with effect from 6/6/2016, they made it into a reverse charge mechanism, which means they put it back to where it was originally. So originally when introduced, service tax on senior advocates was on a reverse charge mechanism. In between, it became forward charge mechanism, which was contested. And thereafter, they rolled it back and made it into a reverse charge mechanism. So what is important to know for all the senior advocates that you may be dealing with, or are many of our batch, I mean, our alumni are already senior advocates, that you need to worry about this particular era only, which is in red. Because anytime before that or after that, it is RCM, which means the clients need to pay tax, okay? So effectively what happened was, whenever a senior advocate was providing services to any business entity with less than 10 lakh, there was no liability of tax at all. And then whenever they were providing service to any person other than business entity, even there was a complete exemption. And the writ petitions that got filed was before the Delhi High Court, before the Madras High Court, the Gujarat High Court, Calcutta High Court, etc. Supreme Court kind of consolidated all of those. There was a transfer petition filed, and Supreme Court consolidated all of that and put it before the Delhi High Court. So all writ petitions across the country challenging the validity levy of service tax on senior advocates are now bunched together before the Delhi High Court. And Delhi High Court has given an unconditional stay, and the stay has been made absolute, okay, insofar by its order of 18/9/2017, saying that no demand of service tax will apply on senior advocates on a forward charge basis, okay? And therefore, today the senior advocates are receiving notices. I know of a bunch of senior advocates who come to me asking for what needs to be done, and I keep telling them, just send a letter to the department and say that, look, the matter is sub judice, there is a stay enforced, and the Delhi High Court is seized of the matter. It has a national jurisdiction now by virtue of the transfer petition that the Supreme Court, in the order that they passed in this two SLPs on transfer petitions, and therefore they should not take any coercive action. So that's the position insofar senior advocates are concerned. And something very similar happened with the arbitral tribunal. I'm skipping this as a matter of detail. Effectively, arbitral tribunal also on a reverse charge basis, whenever they provided service to business entities over 10 lakhs of revenue. Okay, and then a member of an arbitral, this is very interesting, and a member of an arbitral tribunal providing services to an arbitral tribunal, this has been made as a forward charge with effect from 1/4/2016. So anybody that you appoint as an arbitrator, if he is providing services to the arbitral tribunal, which he actually does, because arbitral tribunal is not providing services, I mean, a member is not providing services to you directly, it is to the tribunal, which is the forum. They need to factor the service tax in their charge. So any retired High Court judge or Supreme Court judge that may be appointed needs to be sensitized that they have a liability, or they had a liability under service tax to discharge on a forward charge basis, which is quite a damaging one, and they need to be cognizant of that. Okay. Then when it came to GST, what they did was, effectively they said everybody is exempt, barring this category, which is any individual advocate or a law firm, okay, whenever they are providing services to a business entity with a turnover of 40/20/10. I'll explain what this 40/20/10 is. Effectively, if you're providing service to a large corporate, individual advocates or a law firm, the liability is on the recipient of services and not on the law firm, which means the law firm doesn't have to do anything, and nor does the individual lawyer have to do anything. Anybody else, anything that you don't see in the orange are completely exempt. So you can have any number of permutation combinations. All of that will end up to be exempt, and you have nothing to worry about it, okay? Now this 40, 20, 10 essentially means the threshold, basic threshold is 40 lakh. And then certain states like Northeast, there the threshold was dropped down to 10 lakh. And then the government also issued a notification that some of the states can, kind of increase it or decrease it with a band of 10 to 20 lakh. So effectively what you need to worry about is whether in the jurisdiction where you are operating, whichever firm you're operating, whether or not the business entity has turnover of more than this 40 lakh or not, or check that particular thing. And in that case, it will be RCM. If it does not fall within this 40 lakh thing, then neither of them need to pay tax. So it's not a case that if it is less than 40 lakh, then the law firm will have to pay the tax. No. Okay. The charge of tax attaches on reverse charge only when the turnover is more than 40 lakh. That does not mean that where it is less than 40 lakh, the lawyer concerned needs to pay the tax. That's not how it is. Okay. So you have a peace of mind here, because the liability is on the service recipient or the client that is receiving the services for you. Insofar as senior advocate is concerned, they've maintained the same status as was pre-GST, which is whenever a senior advocate is providing services to a business entity with a turnover of more than rupees 40, 20, 10 lakh, then it's on a reverse charge mechanism. So they don't even have to worry about it. Other than that, they're largely completely exempt from tax. So these are the two entries that you need to keep in mind under GST. Rest, nobody needs to bother about. Okay. Same with arbitral tribunal. I'm skipping this, a matter of detail, and wherever necessary, you can make a reference to this. Now, what is important, oftentimes I get a question that, fair enough, do I need to register at all under GST? Okay, or did I need to register under service tax? Now, service tax is gone and long gone, and therefore, whether you have registered or not is of no consequence today unless you get a notice. But under GST, you have to keep in mind something very fundamental. Whenever the liability to pay tax is on a reverse charge basis on the client, you have no obligation to register as a service provider, point one, which means every lawyer, every law firm, whoever is providing services and the tax is payable on reverse charge basis by the client, you, the lawyer, and you, the law firm, you do not have any obligation to register under GST, point one. However, wherever you import services from outside the country, and which you do in many cases, for example, you could be buying subscription, international subscriptions of any database. Okay, it could be expensive law journals from outside. You could be subscribing to that database, or there are many times people make these payments and sponsorships to foreign journals for publication of their articles or publication of their logo of the firm and whatever else. So there are any amount of imported services in the realm of law, in the realm of sponsorship, in the realm of other soft services, softwares that you may be importing. Wherever you are importing services on which you must pay tax on a reverse charge basis as an importer of services, you have an obligation to register. So the short point is, even though you may not be, or you are not required to register under GST for having provided a service because you are under RCM, by virtue of you having imported services from any third party of whatever kind, sponsorship, databases, in advertisement or whatever, you are obliged to register under GST. And if you have not registered under GST, then there is a dereliction of duty that you have committed. And therefore that is where there is a significant issue that will happen. I'm sure your chartered accountants must have advised you that each time you're importing services from outside, you need to pay the tax. And the moment you have an obligation to pay tax, you have an obligation to register as well. So this bullet point that you have in your slide, if anyone is liable to pay tax on reverse charge basis, say on import of services, registration obligations arise. It's a very, very clear thing, and many people miss out on this particular thing. Okay, that's the point. And of course, you can take voluntary registration also, because, for example, I have taken a voluntary registration when I set up my chamber. And the reason why I took a voluntary registration, because it is so useful. I mean, each time I go for any kind of regulatory concession from the government, they always ask for a GST registration, and it kind of helps me. It is harmless. I may have to file returns, which are all nil, but it's harmless. It helps me go through the process of various concession schemes, benefits, whatever else may be there from the government, by showing that GST registration makes me a legitimate service provider accounted in the books of the government of India, and therefore that kind of helps me. But everybody need not follow that. I'm not saying that everybody needs to take a voluntary registration, but if you choose, you need to. But I had to obtain GST registration also because I had imported some expensive database from the US. Okay, the various US case laws, etc. I had to procure, and therefore I had to pay GST on that. And therefore I was obliged to register, and I did so. So wherever you have such a situation, be careful. You need to have a registration in place. Imports and exports, I'll simply put that any services that you render to any law firm outside the country for whatever reason that you may be doing, let's say Clifford Chance has given you a referral and you are working for Clifford Chance, and then any services that you have provided to Clifford Chance is an export of service. You need not pay any tax, and therefore there is no obligation, of course. Okay, rest assured there's no problem in that account at all. Okay, okay. Uh, then we come to the adverse implication of GST. Now, this is where I want to pause. So what happens if you are providing a service, individual lawyer aside or a law firm? The larger the law firm, the bigger the problem. So when you are providing a service and you're setting up a business operation, there are a whole host of things that you procure on a given day, in a given month, in a given year. What are those things? You could have procured the premises on which you operate on a lease. On a lease, apart from stamp duty, there is a GST that comes to you as well. So the lessor is going to charge you a GST, which you have to pay from your pocket and give it to the lessor. So as a lessee, you incur the GST as a cost. You buy a mobile phone, you buy laptops, or you take these laptops on rent. Either which way, there is a GST that comes to you as a cost. You have a telephone connection, you have a high-speed internet bandwidth, you pay a GST for procuring those kind of essential services. There are security guards that may be there for your office premises, and therefore you pay GST on their services. There are a multitude of services, printing, stationery, you name it, office consumption of various articles, food items, and so on and so forth. There are a multitude of services, goods that you procure, all of which comes to you as a GST on your cost side. Now, when you have a GST on your output side to be discharged by the recipient of service, there is a break in the chain, meaning thereby that if you were on a forward charge basis, you would have had to pay an output GST. But since you are on a reverse charge basis, you don't pay any GST on the output at all. Resultant, the GST that you have incurred on the cost side for procurement of various services and goods to run your business becomes a business cost to you. And that business cost could have been eroded, could have been mitigated if you were on a forward charge basis. Meaning thereby that there is a significant leakage of your profit by virtue of this reverse charge mechanism. And I have some illustrations for you, which I'll take you through. So I just wanted you to appreciate this fundamental point that whenever, or the very heart, at the heart of GST is the concept of doctrine of neutrality, which basically means that it's a tax on consumption, and business entities should not incur taxes. So whatever taxes are charged from the business entity, they should be able to claim entire credit of those taxes, utilize them in payment of their output tax liability. And if you don't have any output tax liability, obviously those credits becomes a cost to you. And the moment those credits becomes a cost to you, it hits your profitability. Okay, so the question that I have for all of you to consider is that would it not be a better situation that instead of individual lawyers and law firms operating on a reverse charge mechanism, were to operate in a forward charge mechanism? Because if you did operate on a forward charge mechanism, of course, you will have an additional compliance issue of having to register, file returns, and so on and so forth. But that small administrative inconvenience brings in its fold a significant cost efficiency, and your profitability could increase. And in times of COVID, in times of depression, such we are seeing in the economy today, where the economy has tanked south, every amount of efficiency that you can bring in your cost structure is nothing but money added to your bank. And therefore, my proposition for all of you to consider is that perhaps it is time to canvass before the government that we should not be anymore in the reverse charge mechanism. We should be in a forward charge mechanism. That's the proposition, and therefore I'll take you through. This is the whole basic concept of tax neutrality, etc., that I spoke about, and profit erosion. Now I have got a simulation for you to consider. So there is a simulation. Just follow this. While I know lawyers generally shudder to look at numbers, but at times in life we need to also spend some time looking at. These are basic numbers, very easy to understand. I'll walk you through that. So let's say there is a law firm. Okay, it has an office rental. Okay, let's say it pays about 150 rupees towards office rental, and it therefore pays a 27 rupees of GST. So total cost to the company, if you are in a reverse charge mechanism, is 177 rupees. So you basically paid 177 rupees from your pocket. And then you have office equipment rental, you have security services, telephone, subscription, travel, others, payroll cost, etc. Ignore payroll cost for a minute. So until others, the company has incurred GST all through it has incurred GST. All of that is basically sitting as a cost. And if you add a payroll cost, which is your, all the lawyers that are employed in the law firm as retainers or whichever way you've been, let's say that cost is about 400. So effectively, for a law firm operating in a reverse charge mechanism, the cost of operation is 813. But if they were to operate in a forward charge mechanism, this entire line that you see of 63 rupees will no more be a cost to them because it is available as a credit. If it is a credit, then it doesn't enter your cost function. And therefore, for a law firm that operates on a forward charge mechanism, the cost will not be 813, it will be 750, which is basically 750 minus 63. 750 plus 63 gives you 813. So the cost structure of a law firm operating in an RCM or reverse charge mechanism is higher because credits are not available. Whereas if they were to operate in a forward charge, it would be 750 rupees, which is significantly lower. Now assume that the law firm wants to make a fixed income or a margin of, let's say, 350 rupees. Okay, assume that it's a fixed margin. Some people operate on a fixed margin. Some work on a return on investment basis, which is the second slide. So if you were to operate on a fixed margin of 350 rupees, then how much would you charge your client? Insofar as an RCM is concerned, you would charge your client 1,163 rupees. Whereas when it comes to FCM, forward charge mechanism, you will only charge 1,100, which means the client, okay, client gets the services at a cheaper rate of 1,100. Anyway, we have a pressure on our billings from our client. They want a concession. So if a client gets the billing at a reduced rate, 1,100. And the other way to look at it is that to achieve the same revenue number of same margin of 350 rupees, this is very important. To achieve the same margin of 350 rupees, you will have to have a higher billing, higher effort of 1,163 rupees. So if you did a 1,163 rupees of billing, you made 350 rupees. Whereas if you did a billing of 1,100, you would have still got the 350 rupees profit. So it is a clear, open and shut case that to achieve the same profitability, if you have to bill lesser, then that is always preferable over having to bend your backwards to get to the same margin. So the incremental effort, that is 663 rupees is what I've shown here. Incremental effort needed in case of RCM to achieve the same profit margin is 63 rupees. Now you extrapolate that into the turnover of a firm, 500 crores, 600 crores, the merchants of the world. I don't know, there are numbers are even obscene, large numbers. Even a reasonable firm would have about 10 crores, 15 crores or whatever. And you extrapolate that, and this 63 could be as huge as maybe 5 crores or 3 crores, 10 crores. Okay. So you have a huge cost arbitrage that is available and you're basically leaking profit. Now, on the GST, so when you raise the invoice on a forward charge mechanism, when you are on an RCM, you don't charge anything on your invoice. Okay. When you're on a forward charge, you will charge 198 on the bill. Now, the client amount that you will charge to the client on the invoice is going to be 1,163 in case of RCM, because there's no charge of service tax that you will recover or GST. Whereas when it comes to a forward charge, you will charge 1,298. But whenever the client is eligible to claim credit, which most clients will be, there either manufacturers or service providers, even though the invoice may look like 1,298 is a huge number, but the real cost to the client is not 1,298 at all, because this 198 that is being charged by you on the invoice is available to the client as a credit. Effectively, for the client, the cost is 1,298 minus 1,100, which is basically, 1,298 minus 198 is basically 1,100. So even though the cost to the client also relative to reverse charge is lower, 1,100 and 1,163. So the point to be noted is that it is efficient, cost efficient for the client as well. it is efficient for us as lawyers and law firms to be able to bill lesser and yet earn a higher margin. Else we have to burn the midnight lamp to get to the same revenue number, get to the same margin, which otherwise we would have got by billing lesser in a forward charge mechanism. So we are leaking money in that sense, and therefore it is probably not a good idea at all. Now, this was an illustration where we are doing the margin is on a fixed basis, which means come what may, 350 rupees I need to make. But many businesses don't operate in that manner. Okay. Some business operate on what is called a return on investment. And let us say we go by the notion, those of you who run firms or who run P&L would know, we go by this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 is the payroll, 1/3 is your middle line, 1/3 is your bottom line. So 1/3 is the profitability, which therefore means that 33% profit is what I want on my cost. So if I extrapolate that and put it into the same context, instead of 350 rupees, if I apply 33% as my return on investment, or ROE, or return on equity, whichever way you want to put it, 33% of your cost in an RCM would be 268, and 33% of your cost on 750 would be 247. So while in absolute numbers, the profit may look lesser in a forward charge relative to a reverse charge, but mind you what, you have a headroom of 83.79 rupees available to you, because your revenue in this case is going to be 1081, which is 813 plus 268. Okay, and here the revenue is going to be 997 plus 247 plus 750. So this difference is 83.7, which means that you can increase your revenue from 997 to 1081 without losing a dime, which means you have a headroom of 83 rupees available with you to offer discounts and play in the market. And the client will not have any challenge whatsoever, which means that your flexibility in the market also goes up. And whenever there's a fee pressure, which oftentimes many of us face, and all of us face, and certainly in COVID times, everybody is facing, So therefore, even in a return on investment basis, you create headroom for yourself for a 83 rupees kind of margin. So the net, what I'm saying is, okay, and this is where I'll rest my presentation. I'll open it for discussion, and Nigan can come in, is that, look, because of the break in the chain and reverse charge mechanism, all of us are leaking profit. All of us are not able to utilize the benefits of credit available under GST. If we were to get into this forward charge mechanism, we would have had a better way to kind of get more profitability, and it will not be an inefficient situation. It is basically an initiative I'm talking about for self-preservation. Okay. Because if the rest of the industries can take the benefit of GST and the credit chain that operates, why is it that we as lawyers and law firms should not be? Our close cousin, which is chartered accountants, they take this advantage so well because they are not on a reverse charge mechanism. They are on a forward charge mechanism. They get the benefits of the entire GST credit scheme, and therefore their efficiencies are tremendous, whereas we are not. But there is one school of thought that often says that, look, individual lawyers who have no wherewithal, how do they file the returns and do complexity? Because if you're on a forward charge, you'll have to file the returns and pay the tax, and it's an additional administrative burden. For those people, there could be two ways in which it can be kind of evaluated. First is, I don't believe, and as a tax policy, I don't believe that administrative inconvenience would be a reason why a person should not pay tax on a forward charge basis. Okay. Because the same set of lawyers, individual lawyers, are also filing income tax returns, or are they saying that they don't file income tax returns at all? I'm sure they do. Okay, the same advocate, who is operating may have some property because his father's property. There is a property tax that is being paid. There is no RCM there. So inability to file return cannot be an answer. Okay, but assuming that is a difficult task, an onerous task, because the number of lawyers that are below the threshold are so high, well, then insofar as those are concerned, there could be an exemption notification carte blanche saying that if your turnover in the preceding year was no more than 20 lakhs, then you're exempted. So you could have a two-stream approach. Everybody is taxable on forward charge. Whoever has a turnover less than, let's say, 20 lakh or 30 lakh or whatever is completely exempt. So for them, there is no need for registration. There's no need for filing returns, none of those things. So it's more like a standard deduction, if you will call it. Okay, like it happens in income tax, that up to a threshold of 5 lakh or whatever else, you don't pay income tax. Fair enough, you apply the same principle. So those individual lawyers who don't have the wherewithal to carry out the filing of returns and the cumbersome process of tax assessment, etc., make them exempt by way of a notification. No difficulty. But the rest of the lawyers who have the capacity, and look at it, why should senior advocates not pay the tax? Every time they stand up in a court of law, they are asking for 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs, etc. They have all the wherewithal to have an accountant to do that. They can't shy and they can't say that, oh, we shouldn't be in a forward charge. It's for their benefit. Well, assuming that senior advocates are a class of advocates under Section 16 of the Advocates Act, and therefore they should have a preferential treatment, keeping that debate aside, a law firm which employs 500 people, 600 people, for them, what is the difficulty in filing a return? There's no difficulty at all. You have slew of people who are maintaining your internal accounts, MIS, and you have all kinds of people, marketing managers, doing all of the PR work, etc., etc. Why is it so difficult to file a return? So for the benefit of those who are at a higher threshold, let's say beyond 20 lakh or 30 lakh or whatever it is, to my mind, they should be on a forward charge. And if you're on a forward charge, huge amount of efficiencies will come in. For those that are individuals or small law firms or small lawyers or whatever you may call it, having a threshold, let's say 20 lakh or 30 lakh or 40 lakh, whatever the number may be, they can be exempt, and therefore they don't need to be. So therefore you can approach, you can have a twin approach in dealing with this particular problem. So that was my suggestion for all of you. And I don't think I have anything else to speak. Of course, the annexures are there. These are details. You can read it at your leisure. Over to you, Satya and Nigam, for your subsequent discourse.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sujit. And I think there's some questions, but let's, and I mean, I'm passing the mic on to Professor Nigam, so if he could get his thoughts.
Thank you, Satya, and thank you very much, Sujit. I hope you can hear me. I have been having some problems with my computer audio, so hopefully, if you can't hear me, just let me know in the chat or in the Q&A column. So I have not much to add. I'm going to be very brief. In fact, I think Sujit has been quite comprehensive and has laid out the issues quite well. I think probably I'll best serve the community here if I just emphasize a few points that he made and kind of give you a big picture as well. So as we all know, in GST, the reverse charge mechanism is almost like an anomaly, right? I mean, what's really important in GST has been the traditional forward charge. So reverse charge basis is a sort of an exception to the rule, so to speak, and therefore it's kind of strange that certain things are still kept within reverse charge, and there has to be specific reasons for it. In other words, forward charge in the GST should ideally be the default option, and any reverse charge basis there has to be a specific justification for it. Right? And so if we can't find a specific justification for reverse charge basis, then I really don't think we should have that for that particular service or that supply of a good. As Sujit and I have spoken before, and Satya was also there, a lot of reverse charge basis justifications come from compliance, saying that it's difficult for us to, for the service provider, for us to pin that service provider down for compliance, and therefore we would look to the service recipient for complying with the GST or any indirect tax on this point. And I'm not really sure, I agree with Sujit that I'm not really sure that there's a compliance issue here because of which we should be imposing the reverse charge basis on lawyers at all. I mean, I don't see any compelling compliance issue. I mean, truckers are different from lawyers. I mean, there may be a compliance issue for truckers, but I don't know why there should be a compliance issue because of which RCB is being issued on lawyers. If there is some other justification for RCB, we'll have to look into it. But I think compliance seems to be one major justification. And as Sujit has already said, there are various instances where that's not the case. In fact, in my opinion, this whole idea of reverse charge basis on lawyer services is just policy confusion. One look at the history of service tax, which Sujit already did for you, will show you that the government has just come up with various permutations and combinations over the years about it. The forward charge basis for sometimes reverse charge basis, and then there's been a stay order on certain of these charges by the courts. So it's been more of a policy confusion rather than a policy justification on why reverse charge basis has to be imposed. I think there is a good reason for us to at least seriously consider the forward charge basis for lawyer services, three of which have been mentioned by Sujit. The idea that it could result in it's not a cost anymore. It allows for credits to be used. It's not a cost to the client either, and it also allows for some headroom, as the words used by Sujit. There could be some discounts, etc., which allows for some. It frees up a little bit of money for the law firms or lawyers to be able to offer services at competitive prices. And I think all those justifications that Sujit gave are quite valid to me. So the problem to me seems to be going forward, seems to be that GST registration and the forward charge will lead to the inevitable compliance issues now on part. And when I say compliance here, I mean the form compliance on the part of the lawyers, monthly forms and yearly forms and input tax credit forms and all those other forms that are required under the GST regime. And I think, once again, I think that's right. I think that these compliance burdens are not a compelling reason. We comply with income tax, and there are lots of forms for that as well. And there could be an exemption system, as mentioned by Sujit. In fact, I wonder if we could even have some kind of a composition levy. Sujit, you didn't mention that, but we could even have a composition levy for lawyers, right? Which kind of takes care of a lot of compliance burdens. I think those kind of things can help in ensuring that lawyers who within a certain threshold are not really inconvenienced by the reverse charge. So I think the time has come for us to seriously think about why we need reverse charge at all. So I come back to the point I started with, which is that I think forward charge is the default in GST law, and reverse charge requires special justification. So if there is no special justification, we shouldn't do it. Over to you, Satya and Sujit.
Thanks. Nigam, I wanted to deal with a few questions that I've just read. Okay, but before I did that, I'll deal with this composition levy. It's a fantastic idea that you make. But historically, the problem on composition levy has been that any amount of duty paid on composition scheme is not creditable to the buyer.
Yeah.
So if they bring out that composition scheme as is classically understood under VAT as used to have or service tax earlier on, then it could just choke the system and it could be inefficient. So, from frying pan to the fire. So therefore composition scheme may not be the best thing unless they permit a credit of that, which is essentially a way of reducing the tax cost but taking away the compliance. So that's the advantage of a composition. But that's the comment that I had. Now let me deal with some of the questions that I see, very interesting questions. First is my Sumit Malik. Okay, I'm reading your question, Sumit. Okay, good to see that you're here. You should take initiative in publishing this, okay? Ironically, he says, ironically, it is the government which wanted lawyers and law firms in the FCM and the lawyers who challenged it and got the policy changed to RCM. The efficiency that you speak of will bear itself out, but is that the only consideration for resisting FCM or something more unspoken? I have a view on that. Okay, and the view is, if you read the writ petition that was originally filed by the individual lawyers before the Delhi High Court when service tax was introduced on them, the reason they quoted was apparently lawyers don't render services. They are into this noble profession and therefore they cannot be said to be providing services. That was the reason why they went to the government and said, look, you cannot charge a service tax on legal services because legal services does not involve any services. Now, whether it is a noble service or not a noble services, I don't know, but I certainly don't believe the legal service is not a service. By the way services are defined today under the Constitution, if you look at entry 12A, Article 366, services are defined to mean anything other than goods. So you actually have no headroom to take any contention or any argument. The legal services is not a service. And the definition of services in the Constitution will be read in stricto sensu by the court. So you have no hope in hell to be able to argue before the court that it is no more, it is not a service. So Sumit, to answer your question, yes, the underpinning current that was there was that they said that it was not a service, which I don't buy. So that's my answer to that question.
Sorry, I mean, under the GST law, as you said, that argument will not hold water at all.
At all. It will just not hold water at all, because the way it has been defined today. Then I come to Aparna Mittal's, she has put in two questions. I'll deal with one after the other. If a lawyer has earnings from other sources like FD, capital gains, etc., do they need to register? As the exemption is only for services covered under RCM. Also, how is this threshold of 20 lakh to be computed? Aparna, when you look into the presentation, which you will get it shortly, there is a slide at the end where I have explained how the value is to be calculated. In short, any income which is liable to service tax or GST will be factored in that. But the real question is whether any income that you earn from FD, is it a service? I don't think it is a service. I don't think any income that you have earned by having put money into the bank and receiving, after all, what you get there, it is an interest. Okay, the interest income is exempted from GST straight away. So therefore that can't be added. Okay, then the second question that you put was on dividends. No, sorry, I can't see the question. Where did that question vanish?
Hold on. This is capital gains. You said
capital gains. Yeah, capital gains is again not a service. There is no question of any capital gains is a service. It's not a service. So whether capital gains can be said at all to be a service itself first has to be decided by the court before you can get to a situation whether it has to be added. So stricto sensu, the 40 lakh turnover breach that I'm talking about, threshold, will cover any service income of yours which is otherwise liable to GST. It is not restricted only to legal services. So that's one. Second, in computing what will go into that, you have to see whether that is actually a service or not. And therefore, individual elements will have to be examined separately. FD and capital gains and all of that will have to be looked at separately. Then she has another question on import of any kind of services. This is Aparna's question. On import of any kind of services which may be under RCM. You mentioned we as recipients have to register. How does one know which are such services, as these are governed by foreign law under which foreign seller service provider charges VAT? No, that is wrong. That's not correct at all. Whenever you are expending precious foreign exchange to import any services, irrespective of what the host country may be charging, you have a liability under section 7 read with section 9 of the GST to pay the tax on a reverse charge basis. Any import of services is liable to GST. So you don't have to at all bother what is the host jurisdiction provision. Okay. So you may have paid VAT in that jurisdiction or in purchasing, but that's not the government of India's concern. And I'm quite surprised that the host jurisdiction is actually charging you VAT, because the international policy on this is that you export goods and services and not taxes. So they ought not to have charged you VAT to begin with. And if they have done so, they may be in default of their own municipal law, so to speak. But without getting into that, all you need to remember is if you are paying foreign exchange to procure your services from outside, from a vendor located outside, which is a service, okay, as defined, you have an obligation to charge GST unless it is specifically exempt. Keep that in mind. Okay, that's your second question. Now let me go to the next question by whoever has asked. Hold on. What happens if a business entity is a trust? This is Purnima. What happens if the business entity is a trust and it itself is on RCM? What happens? Well, trust is on RCM for what purposes? When the trust is receiving services, irrespective of whether the trust may be on an RCM or not, but by virtue of it receiving services from somebody else, it has to discharge tax on an RCM basis. So the provision of service by trust to somebody else, that somebody else may be paying tax on an RCM basis, does not mean that when the trust is procuring services from a law firm, it need not pay on RCM. Okay, so therefore that is a misconception. The trust will necessarily have to pay also for having procured services from a lawyer or law firm, as the case may be. Then there is an anonymous attendee who's asked, what happens in the situation where law firms engage local counsel on behalf of their own clients, but the invoice by counsel is raised to the firm? Well, I don't understand this question. If the law firm has engaged a local counsel on behalf of the client, where is the privity of contract between? The local counsel has a privity of contract with the client, in which case the local counsel will be treated like any other individual lawyer providing services to a corporate, and the corporate will have to pay on GST on a reverse charge. If the individual lawyer has a privity of contract with the law firm, then the law firm will have to pay the tax on a reverse charge basis unless it has been exempt. So look at that exemption list that are shown there in that chart and figure it out whether you fall under that or not. And I think it will be exempt. There will be no RCM there at all. So an individual advocate providing service to a law firm is exempt. There's no RCM there at all. Okay, so that's how it will have to be dealt with. The next question by another anonymous attendee is, what happens if in the invoice you suggest to client to deduct GST, but client does not? There is no question of deduction of GST. Please understand. When in a reverse charge, when you raise an invoice of 100 rupees, client will have to pay you entire 100 rupees. Over and above that 100, he shall pay from his own pocket additional 18 rupees to the government. So it is not a case that 100 rupees net of 18 is what will be remitted to you. In other words, it is not a case where 82 rupees will be given to you for an invoice raised for 100. That's not how it is. If you raise an invoice for 100, the client must necessarily pay you the entire 100. There's no deduction of GST at source as it happens in income tax. And therefore the 18 rupees on that 100 will have to be paid by the client from his own pocket. Okay, therefore this is something that keep in mind. Then Aparna's another question on 40 lakh rule. When rendering services to clients of that size, sometimes clients are not forthcoming on sharing their turnover. So I put RCM on all clients irrespective of size, even those below 40 lakh, and the clients don't have a problem, they accept and pay. This is over compliance in some way, but I hope this will not be an issue. Absolutely not an issue. Absolutely not an issue. You have an obligation only insofar as discharge of your output tax liability is concerned. You have no obligation to say whether the RCM has been appropriately applied or not. So if you say on your invoice that it is on RCM and the client happily and merrily pays the tax, even though RCM does not apply, then it's for the client to file a refund application before the government and take the money back. You are not in default by any means, so you have nothing to worry about it. So it may be over compliance, but you are in the right side of the law. Don't worry about it. Question on registration. Are there, again, Aparna's question on registration, are there any other compliances like display of name of office, etc., like it used to be under sales tax? And hence people working from home, rented premises have a challenge in complying with other ancillary obligations that come. There is no such thing that you have to display your registration certificate. I have not done that. Okay, if there's anybody who comes to your office saying that there is a certificate of registration, keep it in your WhatsApp or keep it in your phone. You show them that. So today's world, digital world, now you have those apps where all of those documents can be put in. Government itself has come out with what is called a DigiLocker. You put it there, nothing to worry about it. So that's the least of your worry to my mind. Next is from an anonymous attendee. Any example of what is not covered under legal services in relation to services typically provided by advocate advisory? Well, this question is very interesting. Under the Advocates Act, you can only practice law. Practice law will cover whatever is covered under the Advocates Act. If you are not practicing law and if you're doing some valuation related activities, then you're not practicing law. You are actually in default of your bar council license. So I think legal services would mean anything which is a practice of law as per the Advocates Act and as adumbrated by the Supreme Court in that Madras Bar Association judgment where, Whiten case or Clifford Chance was asked to get out of the country, So that principle of what is practice of law is very clear and therefore that you should follow, nothing more than that. Whether in FCM advocates must go for compulsory GST registration? No need, absolutely not. In my presentation, I made it very clear. If you are not liable to charge under forward charge, then you don't have to register just because the client has to pay under reverse charge. But if you are under forward charge, the question was on forward charge, whether FCM advocates must go for compulsory registration. Yes, you need to. Sorry, I got the question wrong. So your question is, if you are under forward charge, must you register? Yes, you need to register. Otherwise, it will be a violation of the law in that sense. You must compulsory register.
Just provided there's an exemption limit, right?
Subject, of course, to the exemption limit. Then Aditya Shamal has asked a question. One of the reasons for the reluctance, as I understand, is that once an invoice is raised, even if the client does not pay the GST, will still apply. And due to large amounts of client defaults, lawyers believe that they will be out of pocket on GST for payments not received and then be stuck recovering those payments from the government on top of not being. Well, my friend, this is a problem with everybody.
Are we confined to legal services?
Are we the God's gift to mankind? Receivable defaults, okay, bad debts, all of those things happen in every industry. So therefore, this cannot be a justification why we should be treated as a reasonable classification and kept at a separate pedestal. So while I understand the concern that yes, if you have not recovered the money from the client, then you still have to pay the tax from your pocket. But so be it. That it's a part of the game. And how many defaults will you have? Probably, by my experience in 25 years, and I think the number of defaults that happens is could be 2 to 3% of your total top line on a year-on-year basis, no more than 2 to 3%. Because if you operate on a confirmed job arrangement letter or engagement letter or whatever you say, or a summary of services with an hours approved by the client, there will hardly be default. So if you do those diligences of administrative nature insofar as your engagements are concerned, you can avoid that. So that's something easily manageable. And this issue, I don't think is unique only to lawyers. Broadly, Balaji has asked, broadly, what are these compliance requirements? I believe this monthly return seems seems cumbersome. Well, Balaji, yes, returns are cumbersome. You need to engage a chartered accountant to do all of that. But just as you're filing your income tax return, you'll have to do that as well. So it's nothing, any more cumbersome than what you are facing currently under income tax. And so therefore, that's my answer to that. Purnima Ranganath has asked, what if a subsidiary is in India, but we are rendering services and paid from outside India from the holding company? Who will pay under RCM? What if a subsidiary is in India, which means you are a wholly owned subsidiary, we are rendering services and paid from outside India from the holding company? Now, who is the client here, Purnima? If your client is the holding company who's making the payment to you, then you are providing services to the holding company, right? So therefore you are exporting services to the holding company. So I'm not able to understand how reverse charge comes into place, because you are actually exporting services to the holding company who could be located outside India. So please DM me directly. Maybe I'd like to understand this question better. And I don't want to take any more time of the rest of the people here. So please DM me directly. Is there anonymous, is there a likelihood of Kar Vivad Samadhan or Vivad Se Vishwas scheme likely for GST issues? Well. Yeah, government has the habit of coming out with these schemes. They are quite scheming in that sense. Sooner or later, they will come out with GST Kar Vivad also. We don't know. I can't tell. But in service tax, they did. There's a whole host of litigation that is going on under service tax and income tax just before they introduce GST. So I can't be sure. They may introduce, they may not. We'll see. Balaji's next question: in many cases, invoice is not paid in full or on time. Client asks for discounts, etc., and delay payments. If we switch to FCM, this will adversely affect lawyers. No, it will not. So wherever there is a discount that is granted, which results in reduction of the sale price of your services, then the returns allow you to adjust the tax liability. So if in a given month, you've raised an invoice for 100 and you recorded 100 as a revenue, in the 6th month or the 7th month, the client asks for a reduction and you've reduced the amount from 100 to 90. Then in the subsequent month or the 6th month, when that adjustment was carried out, you'll get a rebate or a reduction of your GST liability in that particular month to the extent of this 10 rupees. So there is an adjustment mechanism that is available under GST. You will not be out of pocket. What about export of services and LUT? My God, this person anonymous must be somebody who knows the law. LUT is a large taxpayer unit, okay? But LUT concept has not been introduced under GST, so tough luck. It was a concept under service tax. We don't have it now. What about export of services? Yes, export of services, it will apply. Zero rated supplies, they are not liable to tax so long as the recipient of services is located outside the country, which would be any of the law firms to whom you may be providing services, or to any of the companies to whom you may be providing services. So you will meet the export of services condition very clearly. But LUT does not exist today. Vivek Jha has asked the question, do you see any legal or operational challenges if lawyers are given a choice option to either opt for FCM or RCM? Well, I doubt that there will be a dichotomous parallel scheme running for the same set of people. That may not be okay from a policy perspective, that some of them are FCM, some of them are RCM, because what will happen is it could be contrary to your interest. Those that are under RCM will be far more expensive relative to those that are under FCM. So the client will go for those which are under FCM because they get a better rate, better price relative to those that are under RCM. So you could be, you could get kicked out because of the arbitrage that kind of it offers. So I think I have covered all the questions that are there, unless there's anything else. Okay, there's another question that has come. No GST liability for India law practice by an eligible entity outside India to any Indian or non-Indian client, correct? Liability for India law practice by an eligible entity outside India to an Indian or non-Indian client. I have not understood this question. Please DM me directly. Okay, I have not understood this question at all.
I think they're saying that, let's say a foreign law firm that India desk advises on Indian law to a foreign client. So it's all outside the country.
But that's outside the country. They are providing services to somebody outside the country, I'm assuming, right? Not to anybody in India.
That's
Right?
right.
So logically, if the service provider and the service receiver is outside India without touching India, there should be no liability to tax. Of course, there is one weird judgment that has happened from Gujarat, where a trade arrangement that happened between Brazil and US, touching upon India shore, they have imposed tax. So if specific, I can address this question in that manner. But right now, I don't think these are something that will even come within the net of radar of the tax authorities in India. We need not worry about it beyond the point. So, are there anything else that needs to be answered? You can ask me now before we close out, subject to whatever Satya and Nigam has to say.
I think thanks so much, Sujit. I think you obviously Q&A blistering pace as usual. You've answered, I think, most of the questions. Professor Nigam, anything else from you to sum up? Or